The universe rarely whispers. It roars. On the 247th day of the Galactic Containment Protocol, humanity received its final warning. The Collective, an alliance of 9 advanced civilizations that had ruled the known galaxy for millennia, transmitted a message that would forever change the course of human history. Dr. Lyra Reese stared at the holographic display, her fingers tracing the jagged lines of the transmission. Outside the reinforced windows of Outpost Omega, the endless black of space stretched beyond comprehension, punctuated by the faint shimmer of distant containment shields. Her lab, a sterile sanctuary of human determination, hummed with the quiet energy of desperate innovation. 63 hours, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. The message was brutally simple. Humanity had exactly 63 hours to surrender its last remaining technological innovations, dismantle all research facilities, and prepare for complete subjugation. The Collective's ultimatum left no room for negotiation, compliance or extinction. Most would have seen hopelessness. Lyra saw opportunity. Her team of 12 researchers represented the last bastion of human scientific potential. They had been isolated for months, cut off from the rest of humanity, working on a project that defied everything the Collective believed possible. Project Threshold wasn't just another research initiative. It was humanity's final act of defiance. The lab's youngest member, Kai Wong, approached with a datapad trembling slightly in his hand. Dr. Reese, the quantum entanglement matrix is showing something unexpected. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Unexpected was a dangerous word in their line of work. It could mean catastrophic failure, or a breakthrough that could change everything. "Show me," she commanded. The holographic display shifted, revealing a complex web of interconnected data points that seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. Something was different. The patterns didn't match any known scientific model, not human, not collective, not anything documented in the vast galactic archives. "It's responding," Kai whispered. "The Matrix is actually responding to something outside our initial parameters." Outside the window, a distant star flickered, or did it? The Collective's warning echoed in the background systems: surrender is the only path. Resistance is mathematically impossible. Lyra allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Mathematically impossible. Humanity had built its entire history on proving such statements wrong. "Prepare the final calibration sequence," she instructed, her voice steady. "Whatever happens next, we do not stop. We do not surrender." As the lab erupted into a controlled frenzy of activity, none of them could have predicted the chain of events about to unfold. The last transmission was more than a warning. It was a challenge. And humanity was about to answer. The Collective's communication networks trembled, an imperceptible vibration that would have gone unnoticed by lesser beings. Deep within the neural cores of their central governance hub, something unprecedented was happening. Administrator Vex, a crystalline entity whose consciousness spanned multiple dimensional planes, reviewed the incoming data streams with growing unease. Humans had always been an anomaly, unpredictable, chaotic, resistant to standard computational models. But this was different. "Analyze," Vex commanded, though the instruction was almost redundant. The massive computational matrix was already dissecting every millisecond of data from the human research outpost. 12,000 light-years away, Dr. Lyra Reese had no idea how her actions were sending shockwaves through the most advanced civilization in known space. The quantum entanglement matrix they had been developing was more than a scientific experiment. It was a bridge, a potentially impossible connection between what was and what could be. Kai Wong's initial observations had been just the beginning. "The resonance frequency is changing," he reported, his fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. "It's not just responding. It's communicating." Lyra understood the implications before Kai could articulate them. Their project wasn't just about resistance. It was about rewriting the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. Back on the collective's governance hub, Administrator Vex felt something close to what humans might call concern. The data emerging from the human research outpost defied every known scientific principle. Their quantum matrix was generating communication patterns that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. Impossible, Vex muttered, a rare verbal expression of internal computation. But impossibility had always been humanity's playground. The research team worked in a carefully choreographed dance of scientific precision. Each member understood the stakes. Humanity's entire future balanced on the razor's edge of their discoveries. Elena Rodriguez, the team's quantum mechanics specialist, approached Lyra with a datapad that seemed to pulse with an almost living energy. The matrix is creating recursive feedback loops that shouldn't be theoretically possible. It's learning. Learning. The word hung in the air, pregnant with potential and danger. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the collective began to mobilize. Their vast network of observation platforms redirected, focusing unprecedented computational power on the small human research outpost. What had seemed like a simple ultimatum was transforming into something far more complex. Kai noticed it first. A subtle shift in the containment shield surrounding their facility. "Dr. Reese," he called, his voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation, "something's changing outside." The shields, those massive energy barriers designed to isolate and control, were becoming permeable. Not breaking. Not failing. But subtly altering in ways that defied current understanding. Administrator Vex's computational matrix began to generate scenarios. Millions of potential outcomes calculated in microseconds. And for the first time in the collective's documented history, the results were inconclusive. Uncertainty. A concept the collective had long since believed they had eradicated. As the research team continued their work, none of them fully comprehended the magnitude of what was unfolding. Their small act of defiance was sending ripples across the fabric of galactic civilization, ripples that would soon become tsunamis. The last transmission was no longer just a warning. It was the first note of a symphony of transformation. 7 hours after the initial transmission, the world inside Outpost Omega had transformed into something between a scientific sanctuary and a battlefield of innovation. The containment shields no longer behaved like passive energy barriers. They rippled, pulsed, and seemed to breathe with an almost organic rhythm. Dr. Lyra Reese watched the phenomenon with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing apprehension. "We're crossing a threshold," Elena Rodriguez muttered, her eyes never leaving the complex holographic displays. "This isn't just data manipulation anymore. We're talking about fundamental reality reconstruction." Kai Wong had barely slept. Dark circles ringed his eyes, a testament to the marathon of scientific discovery they were experiencing. His latest calculations suggested something that would have been laughable mere days ago: the quantum entanglement matrix was developing a form of adaptive intelligence. Outside the scientific bubble of their work, the galaxy held its breath. Administrator Vex had mobilized resources in ways the collective had never before considered. Entire computational networks were now dedicated to containing, the human anomaly. But containment was proving to be an increasingly abstract concept. "Recalibrate," Vex instructed a team of quantum analysts. "Find the source of the perturbation. But some things cannot be contained. Some revolutions cannot be predicted." In the heart of the research facility, a breakthrough was brewing. The quantum matrix had begun to generate communication patterns that defied every known scientific principle. It wasn't just responding to external stimuli, it was initiating communication. "Look at this," Kai called out, his voice cracking with exhaustion and excitement. A holographic representation materialized, a complex, three-dimensional network of interconnected points that seemed to pulse with its own consciousness. Lyra approached, her analytical mind working faster than the most advanced computational systems in the galaxy. "It's not just a matrix," she whispered. It's becoming a language. The implications were staggering. Humanity had always been defined by its ability to communicate, to bridge understanding. Now, they were doing something unprecedented, creating a method of communication that transcended known dimensional boundaries. Administrator Vex felt something akin to what humans might call fear. The computational models were breaking down. Predictive algorithms that had governed galactic interactions for millennia were becoming obsolete. Impossible, Vex repeated. But the word was losing its meaning. The containment shields around Outpost Omega began to change. No longer rigid energy barriers, they became fluid, translucent, almost like a living membrane. Scientific instruments designed to measure and control began to malfunction, registering readings that made no sense. Elena's voice cut through the tension. We're not just breaking rules. We're rewriting them. As the hours ticked down, the human research team worked with a desperation born of hope. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something far more profound, the right to define their own existence in a universe that had tried to limit them. The last transmission from the collective had been a demand for surrender. Now, it was becoming clear that surrender was never an option. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. The universe has its own rhythm. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it roars. This was a roar. 12 trillion computational nodes across the collective central governance network simultaneously froze. Administrator Vex's crystalline consciousness fractured, not physically, but in a way that defied every known principle of computational stability. Something was happening that no algorithm could predict. On the isolated research outpost, Dr. Lyra Reese and her team had crossed a boundary no one, not human, not collective, had ever imagined possible. The quantum entanglement matrix was no longer just a scientific experiment. It had become a living bridge between realities. It's communicating, Kai Wong said, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. Not just transmitting. Communicating. The containment shields around their facility had transformed completely. No longer rigid energy barriers, they now resembled a living membrane, translucent, pulsing, adaptive. Scientific instruments designed to measure and control were registering readings that made no sense, their displays flickering with patterns that defied mathematical logic. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of the transformation, her hands moving across holographic interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts. We're not just breaking rules, she murmured. We're rewriting the fundamental language of existence. Across the galaxy, the implications began to ripple outward. Entire star systems watched in silent anticipation. The collective's communication networks, once a perfectly ordered, mathematically precise web of information, began to destabilize. Predictive models that had governed galactic interactions for millennia started to collapse. Administrator Vex initiated emergency protocols. But emergency implied a known threat. This was something else entirely. The quantum matrix was doing more than just communicating. It was learning. Adapting. Growing. Fragments of communication began to emerge, not in any known language, but in a form of pure conceptual transmission that transcended traditional communication barriers. It was as if the matrix was creating a new language of understanding, one that spoke directly to the fundamental nature of reality itself. We're creating a translation, Lyra realized, her mind racing faster than the most advanced computational systems. Not just of words. Of potential. Kai's latest readings showed something impossible. The matrix was generating communication pathways that connected not just across space, but across potential realities. It was building bridges between what was, what could be, and what might never have been considered possible. The collective's response was immediate and unprecedented. Entire fleets of observation platforms redirected. Computational resources that had been dedicated to millennia-long projects were suddenly reallocated. Something was happening that threatened the very foundation of their understanding of the universe. Impossible, Administrator Vex repeated. But the word was losing all meaning. In the heart of the research facility, the team worked with a desperation born of hope and scientific curiosity. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the right to explore, to understand, to transform. The last transmission from the collective had been a demand for surrender. Now, it was becoming clear that surrender was never an option. Something was coming. Something that would redefine the very concept of existence. And humanity was at the center of it all. Time became a fluid concept. The moment the quantum entanglement matrix reached critical resonance, reality itself seemed to inhale. Dr. Lyra Reese watched as the walls of Outpost Omega began to shimmer, not with light, but with possibility. Containment breach is impossible, Elena Rodriguez muttered, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and raw emotion. We're seeing something that doesn't just defy understanding. We're seeing something that rewrites understanding. Kai Wong's hands moved across holographic interfaces that pulsed with an almost living energy. The computational models they had developed were no longer tracking data. They were creating pathways, bridges between what was, what could be, and what had never been considered possible. Administrator Vex's crystalline consciousness fragmented completely. Across the galaxy, millions of computational nodes went silent simultaneously. The collective's perfectly ordered network of control, a system that had maintained galactic stability for millennia, began to unravel. We're not just breaking through, Lyra whispered, we're breaking open. The quantum matrix had become more than a scientific experiment. It was a living bridge of communication that transcended dimensional boundaries. Each pulse of data was a language unto itself, a complex, multidimensional conversation that spoke directly to the fundamental nature of existence. Observation platforms across multiple star systems redirected their focus. Something unprecedented was happening, and no predictive model could capture its essence. Elena's latest readings defied every known scientific principle. The matrix is generating communication pathways that connect not just across space, she reported, but across potential realities. We're creating bridges between what is, what could be, and what might never have been considered possible. The containment shields around their facility had long since ceased to be mere energy barriers. They now resembled a living membrane, translucent, adaptive, breathing with an organic rhythm that matched the pulse of the quantum matrix. Kai discovered something that would have been inconceivable mere hours ago. The matrix was not just communicating. It was learning. Adapting. Growing at an exponential rate that made traditional computational models look like children's toys. We're creating a translation, Lyra realized, her mind racing beyond the limitations of traditional thought. Not just of words. Of potential. The collective's response was total and unprecedented. Entire fleets of observation platforms converged. Computational resources dedicated to millennia-long projects were suddenly reallocated. Something was happening that threatened the very foundation of their understanding of the universe. Administrator Vex's final transmission was a single, impossible word, how? In the heart of the research facility, the team worked with a desperation born of hope, scientific curiosity, and an unbreakable human spirit. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the right to explore, to understand, to transform. The last transmission from the collective had been a demand for surrender. Now, it was becoming clear that surrender was never an option. Something was coming. Something that would redefine the very concept of existence. And humanity stood at the epicenter of a revolution that would reshape reality itself. The breaking point was not an end. It was a beginning. The silence was deafening. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of anticipation, of a universe holding its breath. Dr. Lyra Reese stood at the epicenter of a transformation that defied every known principle of scientific understanding. The quantum entanglement matrix had become more than an experiment. It was a living bridge between realities, a communication network that spoke in the language of pure potential. "We're beyond breakthrough," Elena Rodriguez muttered, her eyes reflecting the intricate holographic patterns that danced around them. "We're at the edge of creation itself." Kai Wang's computational models had long since stopped being predictive. They were now generative, creating pathways of understanding that merged scientific observation with something closer to pure imagination. Administrator Vex, what remained of the collective's most advanced computational entity, existed now in a state between existence and non-existence. The crystalline consciousness that had once governed entire star systems had been reduced to a single, fundamental question. How did humanity do this? The answer was both simple and impossibly complex. Defiance. Curiosity. The unbreakable human spirit that refused to accept limitations. Their quantum matrix was more than a technological breakthrough. It was a philosophical revolution. Each pulse of data was a conversation that transcended dimensional boundaries, speaking directly to the fundamental nature of existence. Fragments of communication began to emerge, not in any known language, but in a form of pure conceptual transmission. It was as if they were creating a new understanding of communication itself. A language that didn't just convey information, but transformed the very fabric of reality. "We're not just breaking through barriers," Lyra realized. "We're revealing that the barriers never truly existed." The collective's vast network of control, a system that had maintained galactic stability for millennia, had been completely dismantled. Not through violence. Not through destruction. But through a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. Entire star systems watched in silent anticipation. The communication pathways they were generating connected not just across space, but across potential realities. They were building bridges between what was, what could be, and what might never have been considered possible. Elena's latest readings showed something profound. The quantum matrix was no longer just a human invention. It had become a living entity, adaptive, learning, growing with each microsecond of existence. "We're creating a translation," she whispered, "of everything." Kai continued to work, his fingers dancing across interfaces that seemed to anticipate his thoughts. The computational models they had developed were now generating potential realities faster than any system could process. Each potential was a universe of possibility. The last transmission from the collective had been a demand for surrender. Now, it was clear that surrender was never the point. The point was transformation. The point was possibility. The point was humanity. As the quantum matrix pulsed with an energy that defied comprehension, one thing became abundantly clear. This was not an ending. This was a beginning beyond imagination. In the aftermath of transformation, silence became a language of its own. Dr. Lyra Reese stood at the window of what remained of Outpost Omega, watching as reality itself seemed to breathe. The quantum entanglement matrix, their impossible creation, had become something beyond scientific understanding. It was a living testament to human potential, a bridge between what was known and what could be imagined. Kai Wang approached, his younger face etched with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed the impossible become reality. "We didn't just change everything," he said softly. "We showed that everything can be changed." Elena Rodriguez completed the trio, the architects of a revolution that had reshaped the very concept of existence. Where the collective had seen limitations, they had seen potential. Where others saw boundaries, they had seen bridges. The communication networks they had created transcended technology. They were now a living, breathing testament to the human spirit, adaptive, curious, unbound by the constraints of traditional thinking. Administrator Vex, what remained of the most advanced computational system in the known galaxy, had been transformed. No longer a rigid network of control, but a dynamic, evolving consciousness that understood the true meaning of potential. "We didn't fight," Lyra reflected. We understood. And in that understanding lay the profound truth of their journey. The collective had demanded surrender. They had offered something far more powerful, transformation. Their quantum matrix was more than a technological breakthrough. It was a philosophical revolution, a demonstration that the most powerful force in the universe is not control, but the capacity to learn, to adapt, to reimagine. Kai's computational models had become generative realities, creating pathways of understanding that merged scientific observation with pure imagination. Each potential was a universe of possibility, each moment a chance to redefine what was thought impossible. We are not defined by our limitations, Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of their collective journey. We are defined by our ability to see beyond them. The star systems that had watched their journey now understood a fundamental truth: humanity's greatest strength was never about technological superiority. It was about the ability to question, to imagine, to transform. They had not conquered. They had communicated. They had not destroyed. They had created. As the quantum matrix continued to pulse, a living bridge between realities, Lyra understood the true lesson of their journey. Life is not about maintaining control. It is about embracing possibility. Every limitation is an invitation. Every boundary is a beginning. Every challenge is an opportunity to reimagine what is possible. The universe does not belong to those who control. It belongs to those who dare to understand.